Hey, this is Liam Bowler back with video number 4 of 4, most likely, videos about opening up the shoulders. And I'm downstairs in my house, and because it's cooler down here, it's summertime. And I've spent the last few minutes, the last couple of days really, but the last few minutes acutely deciding sort of what I want to say in this video and trying to narrow it down, which I often do a little bit. And some, it seems, are some videos I make are some lent to being shortened up, and this is not one of those. So I want to front load by saying that. And that said, maybe out of all the things we could talk about the shoulders and about the body in general, what we're about to talk about feels really, really important to me, both in sort of a mindset that I use in my clinic, and then hugely, as I think I've said in each of these videos, that's been stuff that's been really important and useful in rehabbing an old shoulder injury. And that is, today we're going to use the gist of like some front opening stretches, so against a wall, and eventually this can translate into hanging from a bar with your feet on the ground or off, and there's a lot of things you can do with that, which I can put a link to a really good resource for that at the bottom of the video. But kind of using that look of a stretch to awaken, evoke, fatten up, fill out the sensory information for the inside of the joint. In this case, the glenohumeral joint, or really this whole kind of scapulothoracic neighborhood of the shoulders. And there's a really big distinction between the two of those. And most of this video, in a lot of ways, is kind of describing that distinction, because it will look really similar to like a pec stretch. Like if I had a wall here, something I would lean up against and open, or getting in a doorway and opening up, stretching the outside muscles, fascia, nerve tissue, all that, which you might imagine I would say can be great. And that's true. And that doesn't necessarily get to awakening these deeper layers. And an image that has really stuck with me and become more and more true the more work I'm doing is kind of envisioning us, the body, as running electrical currents. I feel like I'm starting to grok what I imagine they talk about in like Tai Chi or Qigong or some of the other martial arts that have a lot to do with how we're moving Qi through the body. And to talk about, power, strength, anything getting to the hand, a much more relevant question than like how big are the muscles that I can use to lift something, or sort of how much current can I hold in the arm, would be much more like an electrical wire from my heart to my hand. And where are the places where that's impeded? And my training changing from, instead of trying to up the voltage after each impedance, going right to the impedances themselves. Or in these videos I've talked about it being a circuit breaker and the shoulder being a really common circuit breaker. So that's the visual that we're going to use this, stretch or awakening tool to kind of fatten up the inside of the joint. So that you can imagine if electrical current were running through me, it could run through the shoulder, both information coming from the hand and out to the hand. Really, this works for anywhere, but again, we're talking about the shoulder. That I can do that through a really open channel. That's what this exercise is going to go for, as opposed to it kind of hitting a viscosity or distortion really at any given joint. But the shoulder is a big one, a common one, and a huge one for me. Expressing as things like hard to reach overhead, shoulder pain, some kind of neck pain, stiffness. For me, it's been a lot about overhead mobility, having a really hard time, it's hard to say, but a couple years ago, I don't know, I'd be maybe here, and then I would start to go to try and reach up towards the ceiling. So this is opening up a lot for me, hugely due to little doses of what I'm about to show you. So you'll do this on a wall or a door jamb. I sort of have a funny thing to show you where I can do it on here. And I'll just show you the back of it and then come back and explain. So this for me, I could be reaching up this way. Same thing, here's the front view, right? Getting your hand on something. This is a TV, but if this were a door jamb, that kind of opening. Zoom in, right? But before I even get to this phase of the stretch, I want to place my hand where it is, either overhead or to the side. Start to draw a little bit of traction away. So I'm kind of opening up my chest away, and I can imagine if this is, let's say this is my shoulder joint, I'm really lightly distracting the joint, bringing the two ends apart from each other. It's not holding and pulling in full distraction, right? It's just literally just using the friction of my palm to kind of get some space in there. If I'm pressing here or here, in this case I would drop down. So getting a little space. And then starting to bring my chest forward. Also, I can push a little bit with the hand. And those two things can really work synonymously. And what I'm going for is a feeling of a kind of deep, often if you've had injury, it can be kind of almost nauseating, like a sickening feeling of the tissue waking up. And I don't say that to like advertently turn anybody off, but it can be the feeling for me hugely of old trauma kind of unsticking and being released and coming to life. So again, I'm here, I apply a little bit of traction. I'm dropping forward as I'm pressing away, or I'm pressing away, not to try to get anywhere, but to try to awaken, and to effectively awaken the inside tissues, the inner inside tissues. And that's the idea. I mean, I can hold that for 30 seconds to a minute. Often, again, we're sitting with some discomfort, not pain, never pain, right? I heard a beautiful quote the other day from this guy, Kit Laughlin, who said, "No organism has ever reacted to stress by opening up." And I think that's so true, right? Not to say there's times where we never push it, but how this kind of like kind of experience is really different than not just spacing out, but paying attention. Can I apply a little distraction, a little forward movement, and a little press, and like, oh, there I can feel that deep shoulder and kind of sit in that spot where I can breathe through it, using my breath as a metric more than a technique, meaning if I start to go, maybe rather than calm myself down, back off a little bit until you naturally calm down, or you don't need to force it. And that's probably going to be a really good threshold. And can you hang out there for a couple minutes? So in that sense, it's kind of like yin yoga, maybe. I'd say, depending on who's teaching, but it might be unlike yin yoga in that it's not passive. It's not an entirely passive activity. When you get into, if you want to take this into different hanging drills, totally passive hang, but still not passive because I'm gripping on with the bar. But clearly I get that distraction if I'm hanging from a bar, already happens. And then from there, if I'm playing with scapular retraction or the myriad of things that are available to you, again, check out this link below for Ido Portal's work on hanging, which has been incredible and has inspired definitely a lot of this investigation for me. That traction opens up and then engaging the tissues that are so easy to avoid. And that's kind of the big, kind of mind-blowing trip of this whole thing for me is if I'm hanging and I'm trying to really squeeze my back and get somewhere, I can so easily avoid this weak little torn, sticky, gunky, lost connective tissue pocket. But if I'm looking for it, not necessarily looking for pain, but looking for what's really the first thing that I hit, I'm engaging in a totally different question than if I ask, okay, how can I do this and accomplish the activity? The point of the activity, and I think I've said this in all these shoulder ones, this is not a range of motion exercise. Range of motion is an indirect benefit from a kind of searching for the deep unsticking of these tissues. Whether that's here, leaning forward and pressing and feeling for the kind of deep shoulder, breathing through that. And from here, there's a million things I can do. You might know 100 of them. You can search, pec stretch and get 10,000 variations on a theme, right? Of turning your head, da 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 da. But what I'd really like to impart and think my, gift in this might be a different sort of feeling attitude for entering this as a kind of training. Maybe in addition to, maybe instead of what you're already doing, or some kind of supplementation. But for these shoulder openers, and you could apply that to really any of these, right? Instead of getting somewhere, I'm like feeling for that deep inner flower of the joint. It might make you feel a little funky, and hang out in that space for a while actively, where your breath can stay awake, you're staying awake to what's happening, but it's not too much when you start to close to the stress. So, I hope this has been effective in that if I've imparted a little bit of that feeling of, again, the classic pec opener stretch, whether it's to the side or whether it's overhead, and some of the different attitude of hanging. And I know I didn't show any hanging today, but I'm hoping if that's been part of your training, then at least some of what I've said, you can kind of get the feel for it. If you didn't at all and you're curious, let me know. I'm super open to feedback on these videos. I figured this would be better than taking you out and showing you what I'm doing with the bar. So keep having fun exploring, and I'll do the same. And until next video from Missoula, Montana, adios. May this serve you well.